And welcome to yet another OBGG Zoom presentation. Thanks for the really good turnout, and we're looking forward to Regina's presentation. I think, as people are aware, we put together a series of talks effectively related to exploration and what drives exploration and why you need exploration. And that's very much a passion of Regina's, which she's going to share with us today. So just by way of background, Regina, I think, as you would have gathered, is Australian. She did a Bachelor of Applied Science degree, a four-year degree at the University of Ballarat. She has had a stellar 26-year career in exploration and mining. She's worked in Australia, Chile, Argentina, the USA, and as we've just heard, Australia and Africa. Covering gold, base metals, uranium, bulk commodities, graphite, phosphates, and other minerals. A notable omission is diamonds, but I guess we can forgive her for that, and we'll let her off on this occasion. She's the Managing Director of EGC, Exploration Geological Consulting, based in Johannesburg, and she's going to talk to us today. I just want to add too, she's done a lot of extra work. She has some really good video clips, and we'll find a way to get all of those available to interested parties, and we'll also use some of it in the discussion at the end of this series of presentations. So thanks, Regina. Thanks for all your hard work, and we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you, John. I'll just mention that I'm also have an honorary role as the Deputy Chairperson of the Australian Business Chamber, Southern Africa. So if there's anyone who wants to do business between Southern Africa and Australia, you can happily talk to me afterwards. So today I really wanted to give a coffee story about my perspective as an Australian geologist residing in Africa over the last 13 years. The presentation is being presented as a perspective for others in South Africa and Africa to consider the key levers to drive mineral exploration and mining growth in their respective countries. I've prepared this presentation in an audio and a visual way, so you can choose how you participate. So I want to start back 20 years ago. In year 2001, I was a geologist in the iron ore Pilbara operations, and BHP had just merged with Billiton. The discussion in the operation corridors at that time is we really didn't know anything about South Africa or its mines. But we felt that South Africa had a deep level of mining expertise. However, if you fast track to year 2010, the Billiton assets were considered by BHP Billiton to be less attractive and weren't perceived to hold the same level of value as other assets within the company. And then if you fast track 10 years later to year 2020 this year, Billiton assets are no longer held in the BHP group company, in the parent company. And the only surviving Billiton asset is the manganese in South Africa, which is preserved in the South 32 company. So South 32 is a subsidiary of BHP, and BHP put all its second tier assets into that company. And recently BHP had removed the word Billiton from its name and returned to its parent name, which stands for Broken Hill Proprietary, which is a deposit in New South Wales. So essentially, over this 20-year time frame, South Africa has decreased its market perception as a world leader in major mining investment and expertise. Looking forward, however, mines can change lives and societies in such a positive way and much faster than a lot of other industries. And we've seen history to show this. So the question I ask is, how can we drive South Africa back to the global competitive exploration and mining investment destination it boasted in the past? So this talk today is about what metrics have driven the Australian mining sector over the last 20, 25 years, and what South Africa and also other African nations and other undeveloped countries can consider if they want to implement the key levers to create an internationally competitive exploration and mining industry. I do have some videos at the end of the talk. We'll see if we can watch those, but it might be better to circulate those and watch on your own time. So I believe we can drive growth in South Africa, and I believe it's a mindset, and I believe it's a focus. If by chance my power does go out today, I did have power failure an hour ago, I will come back on in 5 minutes with my generator, just to let you know. So as part of this talk, I sourced a lot of data, all publicly available from each of these respective entities. I just wanted to acknowledge them. Now, if we start with the macroeconomy drivers between Australia and South Africa, if we look at the Australian export GDP, they have an export GDP of $1.43 trillion, and that's nearly 4 times South Africa GDP of 368. Are we still there? I've lost the screen. Are you still there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I've lost the visual this side. So Australia's GDP is 4 times South Africa. However, it's largely dependent on mining exports as its primary contributor. You can see in Australia, the coal industry and the iron ore, gas, petroleum, all the mining sector are key drivers of the GDP. If you consider South Africa, it's a much more diversified economy, and that's its key strength. It built its industries around its mining. And I recently heard David Shapiro from Sasfin Securities call it ecosystems. And I agree, it's very accurate to say South Africa's strength was its ability to build ecosystems of downstream processing and procurement using its mining wealth in the past. So South Africa must, going forward, support and grow its existing industries to grow its GDP and economy and become more focused and globally competitive, particularly in the mining space. I think this gap between 368 billion GDP and the 1.43 trillion can be improved for South Africa if it focuses on the right levers. In terms of export diversity, you can see that South Africa on the left here is definitely more advantaged in terms of its trade partners. You can see the higher end blues and purples with trade existing with China, the UK, the USA, Germany, India, but interesting enough, not so much in its neighbouring African countries. If you compare it to Australia, Australia's heavily dependent on the Asian market. It doesn't have the diversity of trade partners that South Africa has. It mostly exports to China, Japan, South Korea, India and USA. It's not as resilient as South Africa's economy is. So in many ways, South Africa's advantage with its resilience of its export market, if you compare it to Australia. It also helps you understand why Australia invests so heavily into its mining industry. It's very dependent on it for its GDP. So today, in the discussion around Australia exploration and mining, there's some key components that I'll be talking through in this talk. First, that the exploration and mining is essential to the export business and Australia's GDP, which we've mentioned. The second point is nothing measured, nothing gained. If you don't measure your performance, how can you compete in a global market? How can you see the opportunities for improvement? And you need to measure to achieve high performance. So measuring one's performance is critical. The third point, in my opinion, exploration is the second highest risk investment industry behind the military. And it needs a very strong level of transparency at all levels of the value chain. It needs to be very focused on that transparency. On the fourth point, this is something I think a lot about being an exploration geologist. We need to understand that there's a spectrum of understanding from data through to wisdom. If you don't focus on the right piece of data, you essentially devalue your data set. There's commonly, in my experience, a small amount of data which is used to create information. And that information is interpreted to apply and learn and moves you into the knowledge space. And when you repeat the task using your knowledge, we generally refine and improve the process to create understanding. And once we've mastered the understanding, we can look back on our learning experience with wisdom. So you have to go through each of these phases to create a globally competitive industry and continually challenge your own thinking on how you can compete more efficiently. So this part of the exploration and mine development process, particularly in the modern era, you have to create new ways of thinking to become better and more efficient. You have to know where you are on that spectrum of knowledge, especially for high risk investment, such as exploration and mine development. Then the last point is one of my favorites, indices. Indices reflect government performance. And a quote that I really like by Ken Blanchard is, feedback is the breakfast of champions. That means when you get feedback, if you can look at the opportunity for improvement, you can achieve high performance. It's how you receive and digest that feedback. It reflects what you do with how successful you can become. This slide here looks at the export Australia versus the rest of the world, I guess, and South Africa in terms of dependency of commodities. You can see that Australia is equally dependent on export commodities as with many other African countries. Export dependency is where you're greater than 60% of your dollar value of your income. So if you look at South Africa, its export business in some ways is more resilient than Australia's due to its past industries, and it also has readily available labour, which Australia doesn't have. So in many ways, South Africa's economy is more diverse and is stronger. I put up this graph because it shows South Africa's manufacturing has remained static since 2006 compared to the emerging market industrial production, which has grown. So South Africa hasn't managed to grow since 2006. And David Shapiro, when he says the ecosystems which surround the mines, is very true. South Africa has tremendous areas for growth for manufacturing. However, it needs to continue to invest and strengthen its mine value chain. You know, I read recently that the major chains in retail are now filling the shops with 40% South African made apparel. And I read that the cotton farmers are now increased their cotton greater than 700%. That's a wonderful story where the cradle to grave value chain has been built in South Africa. In comparison, Australia cannot compete in this space. It does not have the labour. It's a primary producer of minerals and agriculture. So I see enormous opportunity for South Africa to leverage its manufacturing industry with its primary production. So talking about the figures, as we've stated, Australia is a big business. These are 2020 figures. Exports are at $289 billion. That's 59% of the country's export revenue. And if you equate that to Rand, that's 3.3 trillion. In terms of new capital expenditure, that's per year, it's $34 billion, which equates to a bit under 400 billion Rand. The taxes and royalties paid in 2019 to Australian governments for mining is $40 billion, which is around 465 billion Rand. And the Reserve Bank calculated that during the mining boom between 2003 and 2013, there was an increase of 13% of household per capita for Australians and their income, and a 6% increase in real wages. That's not just for the mining industry, that's for all of Australians. In terms of jobs, there's 1.1 million jobs in METS, and that's around 10% of the country's workforce. Mining salaries are high in Australia. The average salary at the moment is $141,000 per year. It's a lot higher than other industries. And if you equate that to Rand, that's 1.6 million Rand. The question I ask is, why is there such a difference between South African mine salaries and Australians? It's a wide gap. In terms of tradespeople, there's a whole range of youth employment programs, Indigenous employment programs, managed by the private sector, but also the government. And the government is continually looking for ways to bring young people into the workforce. In terms of mining and the government investment into the mines, they know that each mine that is brought into production will produce several $1 billion of value for all Australians to share, the company, the workforce, the government. So it's seen as a positive investment by the government. In terms of the larger mining companies, they've realised that focusing on risk doesn't enable a business to grow. And recently, a lot of the majors have re-entered the exploration business, seeking growth after a period of time since the end of the mining boom. So majors are now the largest investor group in exploration on a global basis. They spend more in this year, 2020, than the junior miners. And they're looking for big assets, tier 1, tier 2 assets. So it's no longer true to say that the juniors are the explorers. More recently, the majors have taken that place. And that information is from S&P Market Intelligence. So these figures provide a projection where South Africa could focus. You know, the top picks for commodities certainly being gold at the moment, iron ore, PGEs, and further developing the country's key knowledge and strengths to return South Africa to its global competitiveness. So, you know, coming from Australia, I don't know anything about diamonds, I admit that. And South Africa's strength is definitely diamonds and PGEs. Nobody knows the PGE game like the South Africans do. Unfortunately, the diamond market is a declining investment market. So there's certainly leverage there that South Africa could focus on. In terms of battery minerals, I've spent a few years studying them. Cobalt and nickel are very elusive in economic quantity. Copper is always a challenge to find in economic, scales of economies to fund new mines. However, South Africa can invest into a range of South Africa-made batteries and sell them into Africa. How many shack batteries could be sold into Africa if we could make them here in South Africa? You know, South Africa is doing extremely well in the vanadium battery space, the hydrogen, and the technology on lithium ion is here. But I asked the question, why can't I buy a South African-made lithium ion battery at Macro or Builders Warehouse at an affordable price? At the moment, all the lithium ions imported from overseas, they're expensive. And I'm asking the question, we have the minerals, I have the industry, why don't we have the batteries? You can make them. Okay, Australia exploration and mine metrics. One facet that may not be realised is that each state and territory owns and manages their own mineral endowment. It does not sit at the federal or national level. Most major global mining companies also choose to invest in Australia. It's a favourable destination for mine investment. The next point I wanted to make is the mining industry should not be judged by its pipeline. That's futuristic, and not by the current output, because that's more backward facing. If you've sunk the capital into your mine and you optimize, that's an investment that exists. However, if you reinvest and you find and create a new mine, those discoveries create more taxes, more jobs, more exports, more GDP, greater and wider community uplift, and it also improves environmental and hydrogeological knowledge and wisdom. Mining companies undertake the most deep level and expensive environmental hydrological studies, and they contribute significantly to our knowledge in that space. So for me, mining's retrospective. It focuses on reducing the risk. It's backward facing on a known quantity. And in comparison, exploration is futuristic. It looks at the potential growth opportunity. It's more of an outward, wider facing lens. So it's also a very different mindset to mining. So in developing new mines, it creates greater futuristic GDP than just existing mine expansions. So a mining nation, therefore, should focus on its pipeline, not just its ounces and tonnes. So South Africa needs to focus on its exploration as well as through to its mining at the same time. Geoscience Australia has a mandate on the mineral side it's increased its exploration expenditure because it wants to promote the benefits of exploring in Australia. And they see geoscience information as making it available to reduce the exploration risk so investors can make new discoveries. So they're providing very wide, expensive regional surveys so smaller companies and can come in and find deposits. So this is a key investment by the Australian government. As said before, when you invest the data, the information, and you find a tier 1, tier 2 mine, it'll pay for itself, 10, 100-fold. So that is for the prosperity of all Australians. So Australia's mineral resources are owned by each of the state, not the national level. So West Australia owns the royalties they get for their mining assets, and they have a separate legislation regulation. The same for Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania. They're all separate. So it creates an internal friction for competition for mining investment, and they all compete. And this is also the same in the USA and Canada. The USA has 52 states and 52 separate legislations. And Canada is the same. It has 10 provinces and 3 territories. If you compare that, into Africa, the ownership is centralized. It doesn't create space for internal investment competition between different government departments, different levels of government. So state ownership does create the space for healthy national investment. And when you've got a national system like South Africa, you've got to consider that. So in terms of the Fraser Institute results, Australia is the second most attractive region for investment, attractiveness on policy, and also for mineral potential. So you can see here, these are each of the rankings. West Australia, very high, over 90%. It's currently the best destination for investment, according to the Fraser Institute globally for mining investment. South Africa has competed fiercely in the last 10 years. It, of course, has the Olympic Dam deposit and Carpentaria and a couple of other great copper projects. Then there's Northern Territory, Queensland, Tasmania, and Victoria, New South Wales. Recently, Victoria's had a bit of a boom with the improved gold price being a gold, after being dormant probably for 2 decades. So each of these state level governments know the importance of the Fraser Institute, and they each compete and work towards trying to improve. When you're in the upper levels of this indice, you do attract investment for major players, but also the juniors that follow. In terms of companies, so the small companies basically raise money from the big companies or the jurisdictions. So if you look at the largest mining revenue companies by revenue, the top, of course, being Glencore, BHP Billiton is in Australia, Rio Tinto. And then if you compare it by the global mining companies by market capitalization, you'll see Rio Tinto, BHP are the largest. Coming down, we've got Anglo American, based in UK and South Africa, and also Anglo American over here at position number 5. These, what companies, the size of the companies you have in your jurisdiction is important. It's really important to attract and maintain that not only the large companies investment, but also the smaller players. So the smaller companies will sell their projects, will raise money off the jurisdictions where large companies are. It helps the financial flow throughs. But also, a lot of the small companies will also sell the projects to the big companies if they do find a significant project. When those sales take place, everybody wins in terms that the government gets a capital gains tax on the transactions, the project's in a more competent hand to develop on a larger scale, and so forth. So it's important to note that not all exploration companies want to develop mines. There's 2 different levels of expertise between exploration and mining, and sometimes they sit in different companies. So in terms of mineral exploration investors, does anyone on this call invest directly in mineral exploration? And what would it take for you to invest your money into mineral exploration? Would you invest it privately or publicly? Exploration, we've got to ask the question, whose money are we gambling with, particularly in grassroots mineral exploration, where there's a very low chance of success? Many years ago, we used to have a figure between 1% and 3%. Is your everything being treated equal, your chance of success in a grassroots project. So only the very best projects have a chance of becoming a mine. So exploration is a very high risk investment business. And, the mining industry needs to balance that, the de-risking within mining, but the high risk and the opportunity in exploration. You need to manage that within your jurisdiction simultaneously and sustainably to enable growth and growth for future generations. So Australia has built a mining industry really around these concepts beyond its legislation and regulations. It assesses the opportunity of growth against the risk and maintains it simultaneously. In terms of key drivers of mineral exploration, this is the order of priority, I guess, which most exploration companies will look at a project or a province or a country. So first is the natural potential endowment, gifted, of course, to that jurisdiction, whether it's a mineral, it's a metal, or it's a commodity. In today's world of lots of information and data, we know which commodity jurisdiction legislation we can invest to. We know the mineral trains are now largely mapped for key commodities. We know the endowment of South Africa versus DRC. If you want copper, you go to the Andes. We know these things. So that channels, investment into those jurisdictions. The third point is, for a very experienced economic geologist, the mineralization style that is going to drive the economics, and because it essentially determines the exploitation methods and the recoveries. So mineralization style is also connected into the commodity jurisdiction. The fourth point being grade versus tonnage relationship, which you're getting down more into the project scale economics. Grade is king. Robert Friedland is a great driver of grade. His success, he's always chased good grade projects. The second point there being the size of the prize. Long life, quality mines, amenable to ESG factors are what companies and investors look at investing into. Of course, shallow versus deep is always a consideration, a level of expertise and what have you. For a deep mine, you need a larger size mine. For a shallow mine, you can live with a smaller size. And of course, recoveries from the mine face through to the product being delivered to client. The fifth point there is around existing infrastructure. The rail, road, port, it needs to be continually upgraded and invested into. If I draw upon my Pilbara experience, the entire network of rail and ports is owned by Rio Tinto, is owned by BHP and FMG. They are able to export so many tons because they manage and operate the entire infrastructure system. Getting your tons out as fast as possible creates a greater business and more investment. If you, the sixth point there is stable jurisdictions with favourable industries and also vibrant mine and stock exchanges. It's a lot more helpful if you can raise your funds on the local stock market to fund your exploration and mine development. It does get more complicated and challenging when you go international, but of course, in the exploration mine develop business, it's a small sect of investors. It's not a large market. So most within the business and industry, know each other, know of each other, and it's all about the investment. The seventh point there is having a progressive and available workforce. Innovations in robotics for modern mining becoming more and more critical, and bureaucrats being helpful and cooperative to have an ability to implement and make things happen or support it or drive the process. So, the government needs to look at how can we drive and support the mining industry for the benefit of all, rather than put in challenges or barriers, but what can we do? If we can drive the exploration mine development process further in South Africa, what kind of GDP can we have? What kind of jobs? So taking that perspective. Of course, number 8 being the tax competitive jurisdictions and the manageable community expectations. If you add up the corporate tax, the royalties, the community payments of support, if you're up over the 50% mark, in our experience, you generally don't develop. So the tax and the super taxes and all those in certain jurisdictions are a big detraction even from the initial exploration investment. So in that space, the investor has to be able to have a certain amount of space for profit. The point 9 there, the last one, is the jurisdiction understanding of the mine investment cycle. So when you put capital into a new mine startup, you need a secure return beyond the time frame of commissioning the mine. We see commonly where that investment's been made, the capital started, then some of the challenges start, and it's on both sides of the fence. But trying to look at that whole mine investment cycle and really get that right up front. Another point I'll just make is, you know, BHP and South 32, some of the representatives have publicly stated that they will only invest in societies that are equal. You know, they want to see more stable jurisdictions and equal societies to invest into. So we've seen a pull out of Africa in some regards to the larger companies into some of the more stable jurisdictions for that reason. So in terms of the key drivers for the exploration investment, there's no silver bullet for exploration. It needs to be transparent, accountable, and you need to have stable legislation. I can't emphasize more that free government data and historical data helps discover new deposits, new jurisdictions, mines. Mineral development agreements are great economic enablers. What they essentially do is ring fence the project, look at the economics. How can we develop this project for taxes for government and for jobs for local people, and doing that. When it's on a more of a legislative level, it's very hard to fit one size fits all on all commodities. Of course, timely conversion of exploration rights and licenses. We've discussed taxes and industry standards, ESG expectations. So that is also taken into consideration pre-investment. And of course, ownership. A lot of grassroots explorers want 95 to 100% ownership. They want to know that if I make that initial high-risk greenfield exploration investment, where I probably have a chance of 1-3% chance of success, I will have that asset realised if we discover. And of course, investment indices. The next slide is just as an example. I'm drawing on West Australia because it's the most mature of the mining jurisdictions in Australia, the most successful. This is their mine pipeline. So we spoke about focusing on the pipeline, not the ounces and the tonnes. So in 2020, West Australia's mining pipeline is 130 billion. I think that was around 30 billion 10 years ago when I did another talk. So the growth has been enormous in that state the last 10 years. That's up from 180 billion in 2020. So now they're also adding in their power project generation budgets that are exclusive to the resource projects into their pipeline. So they know that if they talk pipeline, it also attracts investment. It motivates other companies and other investors to come. You'll also note the spread of investable projects and where the bulk of the money is. So iron ore, you know, the endowment in the Pilbara is enormous. What they mine per year is an absolute fraction of what is left there in the ground. So it's enormous, you know, big business. In terms of the metrics, this is all measured by the government. So the largest beta factors of mining are openly acknowledged by the government. They know it creates taxes. They know it helps regional communities and uplift and creates employment. So you can see here that they measure all these statistics. The mining and petroleum employment area being largest area, 48% is iron ore, followed by gold, nickel being less, and a spectrum of other minerals and commodities. So not only do they know the employment, they know which sectors. They track year on year the employment. So currently there's 140,000 people employed in West Australia in the industry, and it is growing. They do predict year on year employment increase for the next 5 years. In terms of further statistics, these are the statistics that really motivate smaller exploration projects and companies. If you look at the global production, West Australia is in this dark green. In the next green up is the rest of Australia, and the rest of the world is in the light green. So they're focusing on where are we in the lithium spectrum. not only within Australia, but globally. Where do we sit, you know, as a state within diamonds or each of those exported commodities? Then the expenditure is also tracked. So this is the West Australian expenditure, you can see in orange, and then the rest of Australia, and then what percentage share does West Australia have compared to the rest of the country's states. So you can see that West Australia is getting less of the entire nation, and that's because the other states are becoming more competitive. You can also see year on year how much is getting spent on exploration because it's part of our pipeline. And the same for what's looking at here? It's the same one. This one here is looking at the expenditure per commodity. So you can see gold doing particularly well in recent times, followed by, in the maroon there, that's orange, nickel, copper, and of course the other areas. So these statistics are particularly useful, you know, to look at improvement. Where do we focus? What do we need to do to improve and become more competitive? Oh, sorry, this one here is new capital expenditure. This is mineral exploration expenditure, my error. And you can see the expenditure is up around $3 billion. That's per annum. Looking at some more statistics, so looking at, you know, the West Australian mineral exploration expenditure by type, which is getting channeled into new deposits, which is in existing deposits, and how does that compare? So there's currently 600 million in the new deposits in the last year and 1 billion in existing deposits. So the existing mines, of course, get more investment. Then in terms, they do the same for the petroleum sector. It's under differently, just a slightly different regulation. Well, the one I really like is drill meters, looking at how many drill meters, you know, this is going back from 2003 to 2020, and where are we sitting with drill meters? Because drill meters is confidence in the industry to invest, the vibrancy of it, and it's a flow through to your, you know, potential new mines, new jurisdictions, and futuristic. So you can see the new deposits here. It's been relatively static in recent years, existing deposits, new deposits, and so forth. All of this information is provided on the websites in Excel formats. You can take it, you can manipulate it, you can critique it, all freely available. Then in terms of royalties, of course, this is tracked and reported publicly. You can see here that the current figures for 2020 is $9.2 billion. That's a 42% increase from the year before, up from 6.5. So the government also tracks what these movement indicators are, and, you know, how they can, you know, build further in, you know, into the industry. How can it be supported? This is a graph showing the WA, the West Australian tenement management system. So they track what the timing between applications, what's granted, died as what's been relinquished, and then they track and report where these licenses are, you know, over an annual basis. So you can see how government is performing in that space, and government has key KPIs and metrics to deliver there. So with regards to indices, you know, they, as previously stated, they reflect the jurisdiction's, you know, government performance, its stability, and is compared globally. So governments enforce various requirements on mining investors and mining companies, but commonly don't put critical, you know, requirements for themselves. So I like the indices, and the investor market likes the indices because it measures the government's management, it measures its performance, and how it's comparing on a global basis. So I'm just going to share with you the Fraser Institute, which you're all probably familiar with, and the Resource Nationalism Index and the Transparency Corruption Index. And where you sit on that index really looks at your jurisdiction of competitiveness. So the Australian governments and all the states recognise this competitiveness, and they all work towards improving their rankings. of where they can improve. This slide here is showing you, this is the 2019 results. Australia, West Australia sitting very high up as the #1 investment jurisdiction. South Australia is #6. Queensland is number 15th there. Then this is the full index here, so you can see the spread. South Africa is sitting up here on number 40 of 76. So these are a key focus of government departments. How can we improve? What do we need to do to improve on these indices? Then looking at the actual investment index within the Fraser Institute, West Australia is sitting at 5th. You really want to try and focus to be in the top 10 to 15 to attract the serious mining exploration players. Then in terms of the resource nationalism index, you can see Australia is ranked relatively low, South Africa being medium. Interesting to change in Africa as well. The variability of national resourcism. It looks at, you know, the measures of tax pressures, changing contractual terms. It looks at the stronger local content requirements and also a worsening regulatory climate. So it's a broad interpretation. In terms of movement, it can move the perceptions quite quickly. So if you look at, for example, Tanzania between 2017 and 2019, it's moved from medium to extreme. So you watch these countries increasing, and a lot of exploration investment has withdrawn from Tanzania. If you look at Ecuador, you know, they had some challenges around their bigger deposit there, and that's been reduced in recent times with a lot of community interaction and work being done. So these indices get looked at in terms of when at the point of time that you want to do a major capital investment, and also if you want to enter the country and invest into that country for exploration. The next slide here is talking about the Corruption Perceptions Index. You can see that Australia being relatively performing relatively well, whereas within Africa less so. So it basically measures the perception of government corruption by experts and business people. It does not include the general public, and it's sourced by independent entities, including the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, private risking and consulting companies, and think tank companies. So perceptions index is important. It doesn't change too much. Once you've got a perception, it's very hard to change. So I want to just talk about, I'm going to look at time, I'm going to flick through quickly here. And this is one of the key success stories of the West Australian mining industry. We're commonly banter around as saying the 5th explorer finds the deposit. And I've heard that recently here in South Africa. However, it's only if you have the data of the prior 4 explorers. You might be the 5th explorer, but if you don't have the data, it's a lot harder to discover. So in West Australia, annual reports are submitted and must contain all material information pertaining minerals on that license. If not, it's a contravention of the mining regulation. So all the geophysics, rock chip chemistry, mapping, drilling, everything is submitted. Within 3 months upon expiry of the tenement of the annual reports are released to public, or if there's some special cases, the government will hold it for 5 years and then that will be released. So within the West Australian mining system, you can access all the historical reports, all the rock chips, you know, what have you. I recently compiled a project and I easily, in a matter of days, found 5,500 multi-element geochemistry for that project. So enormous usefulness for exploration. If the mines reports are not submitted, the government, the minister may release information on your other live tenements. So they do take this reporting seriously. There's a whole help desk. They will accept your reports. They're all submitted electronically. You can chase data over the phone or on email. You get a 24 to 48 hour response from their librarians, and it's also available in GIS, it's available in Google Earth and a whole range of formats. This is a slide projection of Australia's gold mining industry by Richard Shoddy from Inex Consulting. You can see here in year 2020, Australia's reached its peak peak gold of his existing mines, even if and it's modelling going forward, even with new projects, it's likely going to decline, even with exploration success. And that's because we're moving from an exposed to more and more of an undercover exploration around the world, which is more expensive and takes longer to bear the fruit. So having future forecasts, where are the areas the country needs to focus on? Where do we need to discover deposits? How do we stay competitive and result in a future generation, a better an equally future generation? In terms of Geoscience Australia, this is the national figures for expenditure and drilling. You notice that at the moment in 2019, it's $2.4 billion and 10 million meters drilled. It's interesting to note the expenditure in the drill meters. This is up until the mining booms finishing about 2013, how we're getting much better value for drill meters versus expenditure. It also tracks the brownfields versus the greenfields. And you can see in 2019, basically $1 billion has gone into 4 million drill meters for greenfields. That's 4 million meters for greenfields. And the brownfields has had 1.4 billion for 6.5 million meters. So there's a lot of greenfield exploration going on in Australia at the moment. And of course, as I said before, some of the retraction out of Africa has returned to Australia in the recent times. So tracking and your exploration drill meters and your costs is critical to understanding what your mine pipeline could look like. This is also tracked in costs per commodity. So you can see the investment into Australia in gold at the moment is very large. You can see iron ore coming off from the boom, copper. So everything's tracked by commodity, and then jurisdiction as well. West Australia here in the yellow takes the bulk of the investment, followed by Queensland and the other states lagging behind. So it's looking at where the money is getting spent and how, what commodities. This is one that I really like, and it's geoscience employment, and something I think South Africa should consider and implement. Geoscientists are the largest employers of mineral exploration, and it's sort of an indirect measurement of how the mine pipeline is performing. You can see in this survey that 67, the majority of geologists are employed in mineral exploration. Mining employs less geologists. So when we're looking at these figures, we want to be knowing where geologists employed, where they're unemployed, and how does that connect into the mining pipeline? How are we producing our geologists at the universities? Are there enough jobs? How do we match that? You know, there's a lot of reasons to measure not just geoscientists, but also all mining professionals and support that next generation that's coming through. There's a lot of young geologists whose parents have worked very hard to get them to a degree, have sacrificed a lot, and I want to see them all have a prosperous future, not just for them, but for their families. There's a new portal. I guess it's not new, it's been up for a few years, and it's combining all of Australia's geoscience data into a discovery portal. Each of the state level geoscience surveys are cooperating, the Australian government, Bureau of Meteorology and Environment, and all these different CSIRO government departments, as well as the newly formed Critical Minerals Facilitation Office, are all going in and combining all the data, putting it online, making it freely available for crowdsourcing to be accessed and then to be further developed. So the reason this is getting done is because the mining regions only cover 20% of Australia in terms of landmass, and they want to explore the other 80% of unexplored. And they know we need to provide these large data sets of pre-competitive data if we want to make discoveries. In terms of budget, in 2016, $100 million was awarded, which is about 1.1 billion Rand. And then just this year, they've proved it to be successful. So they're pumping in another 125 million, which is equivalent of 1.5 billion Rand. So I'm just going to show a video now. You can have a look at what this looks like. And then after that, I'm going to flick through a few few more slides, and then that'll be the end. Just get this running. Just give me a thumbs up, John, you can hear.
Minerals, energy and agriculture. now more than
Yeah,
ever.
we can hear. It's just not that loud, but that's fine.
Sorry, John, can you hear?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Over the last 4 years, through the Exploring for the Future program, Geoscience Australia has applied science and technology in new ways, gathering data unprecedented in scale and detail to understand and manage Australia's vast, valuable, untapped resources.
That's fine.
So how do we know where to look for potential minerals, energy and groundwater buried deep underground? By analysing rock samples and water percolating up from below, measuring signals from earthquakes and lightning strikes, surveying and mapping with aircraft and seismic trucks. We are looking, listening, monitoring and recording what the Earth is telling us. We imaged more than 2 million square kilometres in layers hundreds of metres deep to create a picture of what's below the Earth's surface, resulting in a new generation of maps and data. Each set of data we acquire is valuable in itself, but when we overlay the data sets together in a way no one has done before, we start to see the full picture and gain a greater understanding of where we can make new discoveries. Australia has become a world leader in the science and innovation behind resource exploration. We are placing data directly into the hands of the people who need it, explorers, investors and planners, making a real difference to Australian communities. Our work now will drive new infrastructure, create jobs and build local economies to ensure the prosperity of future generations of Australians.
That's great, Regina. Let's try and wrap up by 11 because there's some good discussion to be had here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oops.
Politikere bliver tit
Just a
beskyldt
second.
for ikke at vide nok om den almindelige.
Okay, so moving on from that, this is what the portal looks like. And this is the importance of the benefit of crowdsourcing data. The more eyes that see your data and download it onto their computers around the world, the more better, you get more investment and more interpretation and use of that data. So in this portal, there's such a wide range of data. It's taking years, but you can access it, download it for free. Of course, it starts at the continental scale with a whole range of process imagery and information and data. It then comes down to a more local level. It includes huge new seismic surveys, a large range of geophysics, right down to drill hole. You can access the high logger, which is the spectral scanning drill log from your desk. You can go into drill holes. They've spent 5 years logging holes all over Australia. If you haven't used spectral scanning for drill core, get to know it. It's fabulous. It can log the core better than the naked eye and the geologist. So it's bringing all this information together basically to try and bring in that pre-competitive data that you need for investment. Just two more points I wanted to make. And a difference I see between South Africa and Australia. The mining professional bodies and government stewardship in Australia working together, working for the better of the future generations for mining is I feel a bit stronger. There are a number of private bodies and government bodies, all separate, independent, but work for the greater goal. So there's Australian Institute Mining and Metallurgy, similar to the SAIMM. And there's the AIG, Australian Institute of Geoscientists, which is the same as the GSSA. But there's further groups which look at each of the jurisdictions, but also the full mine, development pipeline, the mine development, phases. So the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies was formed around 20 years ago as a couple of geologists having a beer in a bar. And today that group has grown and is now advises state level governments, national governments on what are the key components that we can drive investment with. There's also on top of that a lot of exploration independent groups in various regions. There's different mining chambers in each of the states. And everyone will know the Joint Ore Reserve Estimation Committee. That's of course a private institution that drives standards and ethics. On the government side, there's the Minerals Council of Australia. It looks at all aspects of the mine value chain and even gives advice on modern slavery, bribery prevention, everything to protect the industry, you know, from any kind of negative experience, I guess. So it looks at which minerals, what commodities, which forming battery minerals. So it's very, very wide ranging. Then, of course, there's the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation, which most people know. There's also Geoscience Australia, which you just saw the video of. But on top of that, there's 7 state-funded geological departments, each that do mapping, geophysics, and what have you. So if you look at the number and the volume, it's quite large. And of course, it's because Australia's GDP heavily relies on the mining investment in the cycle. I do have this slide, but we won't show it, John. If someone wants to see this, basically what this is showing is the portal for West Australia. You can take a project and you can in one afternoon download every historical report for that license area. You can download the geophysics, all the geophysic files. There's, I wouldn't even know how many there are. There's probably a couple hundreds just in WA alone. You can download drill holes. You can download the geochemistry. So you can put all that digital information into your computer in one afternoon. There's no visits back and forward, paying someone for historical data. You get all those annual reports onto your computer and you're instantly into digital. All the reports reported before digital, say 2000, you have to manually enter, but you are provided text files of that information. So if you've got all this data on your computer digital, you can now understand why Australia has gone into artificial intelligence and all these things, because it's in the digital space. So one of the biggest gaps I see between South Africa and Africa and Australia is it's not in the digital space. It doesn't know how to present the data to investors and leverage that information. It's not necessary to go and spend huge amounts of money if you don't have the budget. You can actually just post historical reports and data, you know. And the last point I just wanted to make was around a recent discovery, and it's called the Julmar nickel copper project. And this is a pure geophysical mineral discovery using moving loop electromagnetic. These systems are getting flown all over Australia for metals. But I think this discovery is on par with Olympic Dam in terms of its remarkable undercover discovery success. So this project was a geophysical target in a terrain 70 kilometres northeast of Perth. It never had any prior drilling or historical information. They were targeting an ultramafic. In the first hole, they hit 33 metres at 6.5 grams per tonne palladium, 0.7 grams per tonne platinum, 1.6% nickel, 0.7% copper, 0.1% cobalt from 44 metres. You can read on to the various intercepts. In the second hole, they got a down dip intersection of 75.1. In the sixth hole, they got 41 metres. This is like a tier 2, tier 3. Let's see how it goes. It's shallow. It's a polymetallic. It's a high value project. The ultramafic itself measures 26 kilometres by 7 kilometres. So this is a province level discovery. It also had some soil geochemistry that was used, as well as the magnetics. But you know, it was a big game changer for the company. Before the drill hole, it was $50 million capital capex, and then after $300 million. So geophysics is one of the key drivers of exploration. So you're seeing a lot of explorers and the major explorers investing in those jurisdictions that have the geophysics and the data. So moving forward, we have to close that gap here in South Africa and Africa. That's it, John.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Regina. I'm sure there's lots of discussions and questions to be had. So everyone can unmute themselves and also show their faces, and Henny and Gert will start managing the questions, I guess, raising hands or speaking up in a big voice. Thanks, that was very, very comprehensive. I've got a few points, but let's open it to the floor first. Henny, are you going to proceed with the management?
I can't start my video because it's been blocked, John.
Okay, Henny.
No, I didn't.
Okay, I'll
Let's ask her to start it again.
I've opened it.
There we go.
Okay. Questions? Okay. Are you there? Can I kick off?
Sure.
Okay, I've got just 5 key observations, and I think that's in a sense the essence of your talk. And I mean, you talk first and foremost about transparency, then there's a pipeline, and then there's the implementation ability. And those straight away really sadly distinguish why other jurisdictions are doing so well and why we currently in South Africa are lagging. Obviously, the transparency goes back to a really world-class tenure system, which we don't have. And then there's information and data, which in this business, and I think you highlighted it very well at the end, if you don't have information and data, and even that old information is so incredibly valuable, and those are the things, if we're going to restart exploration in this country, I think are absolutely paramount. I mean, we have all the skills here. We have some great geophysicists, for example, but we really need to change our approach to, as you say, transparency, getting a pipeline going, having a set of bureaucrats who work together as a team and encourage people to come and apply for licenses. And obviously, it's no good. You can have the best regulations and systems in the world, but if you can't implement, don't bother. So those are just a couple of my points, just to get the discussion going. Anyone else's comments, most welcome.
I've got a question here from Jean Simonis that says, well, how about involving the universities again? Can South Africa do likewise to reinvent our university mining geology expert departments with innovative techniques?
Okay.
Sorry, who was the question directed to?
So, well,
You can answer, Regina.
what is the role of the Australian universities for enabling mining growth in Australia, and can we do likewise over here?
Currently the universities do the technical studies, but they don't produce the regional data sets. The government does. That the explorers also define the targets, investment. You notice the drill meters. The drill meters are very, very large. So the universities certainly have their role in terms of the technical expertise once you're near a deposit, but they don't find deposits, in my experience. So you need the initial data, or you need the historical data. You need to come up with a geological model, and yes, you can work with the universities along that, but generally universities aren't defining the deposits.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we solve the problem where the geologists are always following the wave. When there's a boom, then you find them all going to university, and as soon as they graduate, then there's no more work for them. And so the wave is behind. We need somebody to plan ahead and say, okay, we are going to invest this money. We now must get these guys into university, so in 5 years' time, these guys can do the exploration. That kind of synergy hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, like I'm currently mentoring a VIT student, a geologist, and I said to her, go to your careers person and ask them last year, how many geologists have a job? How many are working in mining, or what sectors? So you can help decide which industry. She wasn't sure she wanted to do economic geology or hydrogeology. And she was not able to find that information, which I was a bit shocked with. We should be aligning our graduates with the industry. Is that being done enough? I've not had the answers. I don't believe that you need to get more education to solve the problem of a shortage of jobs. I think it should be the inverse. We should be matching the skills required for the industry. In Australia at the moment, the companies are definitely, they retreated for a period of time away from university investment. They're back in there now. And to the point with a lot of their automated mining, they're doing almost like TAFE 12-month certificates because they don't need the full degree in some cases. So to me, the universities play an excellent role, of course, but it needs to be aligned with the industry needs.
Okay, good stuff. Bill, you've got some questions. Bill McKechnie.
Okay, hi, John, Regina. Hi again. Nice to see you again. Well done with the presentation. It was very good. Just really a couple of observations and comments. It was quite interesting. I found the slide showing the list of big companies and small companies operating very interesting. Prior to my talk, and I didn't include it in my presentation, but I did a quick analysis of the number of South African companies in the top 50 of the World Mining Index. And I found it quite shocked by it. There was only 2 local companies listed by PwC being in their top 50 index of global companies. I can't remember what they are. I think one was not Anglo-American, because it's no longer seen as a South African company, but Anglo-American Platinum, which is firmly, now that's only a subsidiary of a major, but at least it's in the top 50. I can't remember what the other one was.
Was it Goldfields, Bill?
It may well be, John. I'm not sure. I forgot to look it up. I didn't have time before this talk to go and chase it up again. But for a country with the mineral endowment and the history of mining that we have, I was actually quite shocked by that. And certainly in the last 25 to 30 years, we've seen an exit of major mining companies out of South Africa. And some of the reasons do go back to the attitude of the government and the attitude of bureaucrats, John, will be driven by government policy, or at least their perception of government policy. And I guess part of the challenge for us really is to get government to change its view on how it sees the mining industry. I think they see mining as potentially important to drive future value, but the way they've gone about trying to drive the future value has actually driven people away. And it gets worse than that because it's no longer attracting people as well. And I engaged a lot with government in my previous life. And certainly around the times that the mineral rights were changing, the accusations against the historical mineral industry in South Africa went around things like hoarding of mineral rights. Whereas, and the maps will show it, the historical maps show it, that the state was actually the biggest owner of mineral rights in South Africa. But the target was actually getting, they were looking at mining, the mineral rights around mining, rather than the total picture of what is available to explore and what is available to develop. And the whole idea was opening things up. Well, it's become so difficult, despite the rights being now granted to the state, it's now become very difficult to get access to those rights. The other important things are things like conversion of exploration rights to mining rights. It's not automatic in South Africa. In places like Canada and Australia, you apply for a prospecting right, you have an exclusive right. As long as you follow the rules and you do what you're supposed to do, no one is going to interfere with that investment that you've made, and it's freely tradable. That's not the case in South Africa. There are just too many bureaucratic obstacles that are set up to deal with the unwary. Simple things like the application for the types of minerals. It's not always driven by the geology. It's driven by what the bureaucrat is prepared to give you. Now, if you go for PGMs, you can go for PGMs, but we all know that PGMs does not just consist of 6 minerals. You get lots of other things you recover when you process PGM, UG2 and Marinsky Reef. And all that stuff comes at risk because a bureaucrat, and we've seen it happen,
classic example,
has the opportunity to grant those rights for these so-called other minerals to other people. So there are lots of things like that that need to be sorted out. And I think those are key things that do impact on South Africa's suitability as an exploration destination. If you can't keep your major companies happy in your own country, then it becomes much more difficult to attract outsiders to come in. Many times the types that you attract actually are not the people you want to be involved in terms of long-term investment either. So, those are some of my views, and it really goes right to the top. It's about driving mineral policy, and the rest will follow.
Yeah, great points, Bill. Couldn't agree more. And you haven't got to the water use licenses yet.
Yeah, the only big difference I see in endowment, Bill, is a lot of South Africa's deposits were outcropping, and they were followed the mine corridor. It missed the mining boom here, and it is moving. You might be lucky to find some at-surface deposits, but you're in that concealed space. But it hasn't been worked. It hasn't been drilled. So it's in many ways very fertile. So Orion Minerals is taking advantage of that, and they only need a couple of discoveries if they get their work right, and others will follow. So for me, South Africa's a bit resource lazy. It's had it really easy in its endowment, but it has to step up to the plate, and it has to start working at concealed deposit exploration, which is a lot. It's a different game. It's a lot harder.
No, I agree with those points, Regina. They have had it easy. And I think that's also made, the view on policy and the view on mining, what mining should look like. Government has still got that in its mind, and it's not changing that at all.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought was very interesting, this whole crowdfunding idea. And, in the work that I now do, we do a bit of, I get quite a bit of exposure to environmental work. Now, in every mining license, there's a huge amount of environmental data created on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And it all gets sent in to the various departments, the DMR or environmental departments, and it all disappears. There's no consolidation of that. Now, I think my view is if the companies were forced to put all of that onto a single website and they just pump it in there, then you'll see lots of interest building up and real value coming out of analyzing all of that data. Probably many of the companies might see it as a threat, but managed properly, it actually becomes advantageous, because you can prove to your shareholders and to society at large what you're doing and what the impacts are, and you would be supported by what you're seeing in the general area as well. And I've seen evidence of that in lots of the projects that we've been involved with, but there's no action from government in terms of wanting to do that type of thing. And I think it's really valuable, and the same sort of thing can be done with mineral exploration and so forth as well. Anyway.
Yeah, good stuff. There's a good question here, Henny. Are you going to read it from the Seminesis, which is very, very pertinent? Have you got it on your system there, Henny?
Yeah, it says, Regina, what is the main driver in Australia for making expert geo data digitally available? Was pressure applied or was it done through the government intervention only? It is such an incredible change in mindset paradigm, crowdsourcing, etc. This is from John Simonis.
Interesting. I'll give you my perspective. I don't know if it's ultimate, but Australia is a society that's never had enough labour. Since Federation, it's a country of imported people. One of the contributors to GDP is migration. So Australia makes a lot of money importing people. So it's a mindset of efficiency. How do we create this quicker, better, faster? And that becomes a culture. So you're always, looking for something new, something different. How can you change it? When I first came to South Africa, 2009, and I'd sit in meetings, and something new would come to the table, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'll do that. I love this. Yeah, I'll do that. It's new." Our culture is we want to do the new things, and we'll fight over them. I think sometimes in South Africa, the change is a bit harder. People don't want to change. They want to do it like they got the comfort in their same level. So that part of society of looking for efficiency is different. But the other factor is, if you look at West Australia, it's got very little outcrop. The endowment that's been discovered, biggest of course being the Pilbara, it's got outcrop. The gold sector is not necessarily. So you are always looking for data. My first year you sat on drill rigs. I sat on drill rigs for 9 years. I've drilled, I'd probably well over 1 million meters in my career. We're always looking for that data, always looking for that information. So going into the digital, look at the mining softwares. They mostly come from Australia. By the time you're 5 years into your career, you've used every package. So I think it's just part of the culture and moving that into artificial intelligence. So another key comparison I make, South Africa reigned for me when labour was king in mining. So it had enormous amount of labour and in many ways took advantage of that labour, and it's still living with those consequences. Then along came mechanisation in the 90s. So my first year of work was 95. And, we were working underground, and that was small little stopes, and we had remote boggers, and we thought that was amazing. And, South Africa pushed against that mechanisation, and rightfully so. It was trying to preserve jobs and livelihoods. But, I think after the millennium, we started to see that slipping, where mechanisation was seen as safer. And then South Africa was under pressure for its fatalities, but also more efficient. And, you fast forward probably since 2015. Now it's around robotics and innovations and AI and what have you. So we're getting further and further from that labour. So South Africa's got a bit of a way to compete. You've got to be able to produce those products at the most efficient margin in the world to survive in the markets. I mean, look at coal now. The export market of coal will continue to tighten. So whoever has the lowest costs, CIF into China or India, is going to reign.
Wonderful. Thanks, good points. Appreciate the answer there. Any other questions from anyone in the audience?
I have a comment following and Regina's answer, Peter van der Spey. I think once in relation to the question was, in Australia, did it come from government? Were people forced to disclose, or did they do it voluntarily? My view is that the very vibrant Australian junior mining industry was where this all came from. Because if you compare South Africa, indeed in Australia, the established, the Collins Street mob, BHP, Western Mining, and the club, they were rather like the Johannesburg, Anglo and General Mining and the rest of them. They didn't want to share information. We never had a junior mining industry in South Africa that is in any way comparable, or not in the last. I think it's the Australian, as Regina says, it's a mindset, and that mindset was also part of the reason for having such a vibrant junior mining sector. And the junior mining sector was always about trading deals, trading information. in the pubs and everywhere else. And so I think that's a significant contributor to the overall difference between the mindsets in relation to resources and mining in Australia and in South Africa. So that's my 2 bobs worth. And I agree with everything that has been said before, particularly by Bill McKechnie. Thanks.
Just one thing on the junior market. This is where I think AIM, TSX and ASX have taken advantage of, you know, to some extent the JSE, is they created a financial market. And, you know, I told people your financial market, so if you look at your stock exchange listing rules, relies heavily on JORC. So if you have an industry standard and that's upheld and you have a stock exchange listing rules, you can actually get flow through of capital. So they take that capital, then feeds the junior explorers and the junior miners. But even better, so, you know, the junior miners might have projects, for example, now in West Africa. When those financial instruments are sold, the capital gains tax on those West African assets goes to Australian government. So I find it interesting that JSE is never focused on being the African mining stock exchange and made tax on financial instruments. And it's just left open for those 3 stock exchanges to exploit in countries, in assets that don't even exist in their countries. So it does start with your standards. It starts with the listing rules, how you design that flow through. And of course, at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around that for South Africa, but I have promoted to a lot of like PwC, I've contacted them, I said, don't just think about South Africa, think about Africa, because very soon a country like Nigeria will wake up and they will start a mining stock exchange for Africa. Someone is going to do it. It's a matter of time.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. And I guess, Peter, your comments apply equally to Canada. You know, again, there, the juniors, you know, horse trade, they steal information, they follow other people's helicopters. So it's a real fanfare of exploration, but they get the work done.
Well, I absolutely agree. And that's why most of my career has been spent in those 2 countries.
Okay, well, we need to get you to give a talk as well then.
Yeah.
I'm too busy exploring.
Good. Well, you can do it from the field, Peter.
Okay.
Right. Right. Any other questions to start sort of ending off the program? Last questions?
I guess just to put it out there, I am keen, any feedback, someone can send to me on email or call me. How can we change the mindset in South Africa? How can we, there is a history, but for future generations, you have to look forward and you have to focus. And if it doesn't mean lots of meetings, lots of education process with the government, you know, be it. But at the moment, you know, we're all individuals giving opinions. We really need a one group to have an audience, be invited to junior endeavours, be invited to, you know, work with Minerals Council and the existing entities on creating some of the education on their exploration space, because I don't think mining companies, a lot of, you know, government departments really understand it. So in some ways it's our responsibility to try and educate them and create that change.
Yeah, again, good points, Regina. And I mean, that's something we obviously need to build into our thinking as we come to sort of the end of the program and the discussion group. But we'll circulate your emails, we'll circulate your presentation, and there's the other information that you've got as well. I mean, we need to keep this whole process going. So thanks for your presentation, thanks for your enthusiasm, and let's keep moving the process forward.
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you all the listeners today.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. So any last question, or can we close off? Thanks everyone for your contributions. Thanks Henny and Gert for, as normal, you know, being solid administrators and keeping the system work. Frank, we got a hand from Marine and a hand from Frank.
Okay, thanks.
And don't go, Regina. We've got Frank. Someone wanted a question or not? Or just cheers? Okay. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend. Bye now.
Yeah. Thanks, Regina. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.